Hi, this is Bob Scully, and welcome to another edition of the World Show, Entrepreneurs, the Langvarri series. Entrepreneurial stories are often about business turnarounds, and no business turnaround is easy. But some of them are actually quite spectacular, and this week's guest will give us a great example of that. Eric Melka was well suited to the task. He started out as a true serial entrepreneur. He was a young man selling faxes door to door, and he found a way to create a business out of that by inventing North America's first fax directory and then selling that company and making a huge success of it. He started a charity in Cambodia which was delivering clean water to the population, made a success of that. He started something akin to email before there was email, and that worked as well. But he faced the greatest challenge of his entire career when he was given the helm of Redline Communications. Today, Redline Communications is a very healthy company providing rugged or resistant wireless technology in difficult circumstances. For instance, on the battlefield, supplying that to the US military in Afghanistan and elsewhere, or in oil-producing countries on the oil field, supplying wireless technology to the companies that exploit the oil. They do all of that very well and very profitably. But when Melka was given Redline Communications to fix in 2009, it had burned through $100 million in cash because it had the wrong technology. The markets were angry, the shareholders even more. There were regulatory warnings, cease trading orders, the worst possible perfect storm you could imagine. He faced it, he won, and here's how he did it. Here's Eric Melka. Eric Melka, it is quite the turnaround you've achieved at Redline. We want to get into that, but before I want to give people a taste of it, and we're going to do a bit of name dropping. Here's a very brief excerpt from your client list. Chevron, Conoco, Exxon, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Navy, Lebanese Internal Security Forces, 57 different governments, 19 royal families, every single Humvee in the U.S. Army. So it must be hard to service all those important people and important institutions. But before we get to that, let's flash back to you, a student, penniless, and selling things door to door. Let's try that.
Yeah. I started selling fax machines door to door back in the 80s. Pay for university, be able to go to school. Started selling fax machines. And in the 80s, fax machines were these big boxes, these large machines, and they were expensive. We're talking of $10,000, $15,000 for these fax machines. And the first ones came out, they were compact, and I would lug them around knocking on doors, selling fax machines, literally. And everybody would ask me, is there a phone book? Is there a directory? Remember, this is fax machines. You can't send a fax to somebody who doesn't have a fax machine.
Right. And people weren't sure what it was anyway.
They weren't. I mean, you could do a demo and the paper would go in, the paper would come out the other side, and people were all excited. They were looking in the machine and things like that. So what was happening, every time we would sell these machines, people would ask. And after a couple of years of doing this, I knew there was fax directories in British Telecom had one in Britain, France Telecom had one. They had them all over Europe, but didn't have one in North America. I was wondering why I didn't have one. So I said, I'm going to do the first one. So I called my dad, and I said, Dad, I want to do a fax phone because it's a great idea. It's fantastic. How many phone numbers do you have? I said, I sold about 100, 150 machines. He goes, well, that doesn't make a very big phone book. So he taught me one of the things to do is try to get the lists. So we would buy lists from different people and try to get them from different organizations. And he taught me one very important thing. It depended on the contract you wrote. Because when you were buying lists, they were usually for one particular thing. Mm-hmm. But if you wrote the contract properly, you could use it for different things. Make a long story short, I ended up getting around 60,000 names, 60,000 phone numbers.
Which was probably a fraction of the reality, but it was enough to make a book.
It was enough to make a book. I mean, the book ended up being about a 2.5, 3-inch book. And it was the first one in North America. And it was published and we printed it. And to print it, it was always a very difficult thing because printing is very expensive. I learned at the time. I didn't know anything about this business. And so the funny story there was I got very lucky. And I went to Bell Canada, which was they had a big printing division and so on. And I asked them if we could print the book. They gave me a quote and it was very expensive. I said, well, try. Did a credit bureau, did a credit report and everything else. And somehow, some way, I got very lucky. And for whatever reason internally, I don't know what ended up happening, the book got printed.
And you made good money. I mean, it worked out.
We ended up getting the books. They were printed, and then we had to sell them. And so started selling them was one of the very interesting things as well, because how do you sell? We printed 20,000. How do you sell 20,000 books?
Yeah, indeed.
Well, you call everybody in the fax phone book, right?
Send them a fax.
Well, but it was taking too long. So I remember the Book of the Month Club, the concept of, you know, in Columbia Disc. Remember, you'd get the disc in the mail. If you didn't like it, you could send it back.
Yeah,
and,
that's it, yeah.
So what we did is we took all the names of everything else. I cut out the thing. I literally stick them on the box, and we would ship these things out to people.
Okay.
With a 30-day pay or return, no questions asked, we'll pay the shipping.
Okay.
And lo and behold, people were buying them, and I was receiving checks in the mail. I'd go to the bank, and I almost had a suitcase full of checks for $69, right? $69 here. And
because it was very useful. I mean, you hit a winner there.
there was no other way to do it. There was no other way to do it.
And you obviously had a nose for business. I mean, you were an entrepreneur right from the start. And now I want to jump forward. I want to do the opposite, go back to where we were at the beginning. Redline was not something that was doing so well when you entered. I mean, let's talk about that. What does Redline do?
So Redline builds networks for companies and governments that operate in very remote areas, IT networks. And networks are important because today everybody needs to communicate in some fashion, some way, either person to person, machine to machine, equipment to equipment, monitoring remotely certain things, items, video cameras that are in very remote places to be able to monitor for movement or border patrol or leak detection, movement detection, all kinds of things that organizations need in places that you and I don't go. Well, we go,
yeah,
but a lot of people don't necessarily
but often
go to these
military
perfect example. And when there's a hostile situation, recently in the last few years where our equipment is installed between the Afghanistan and Pakistan border, and that border is very porous, as you know, mountainous, very, very high, very difficult terrain. Networks are important for communication. Networks are important for video and for movement. They save lives in many, many cases. And these are very hard remote areas. You can't run cable. You're not running wire. Satellites don't work. I mean, it's a very, very harsh environment. The equipment has to be extremely rugged. And our equipment, which is military-grade equipment, basically has that capacity, the capability, and the ruggedness that allows these types of equipment to work in very hostile environments.
And you do point-to-point? Like
we actually do point-to-multipoint. So we end up not having to put these, you always see these drums, you're somewhere and you see these big drums on these towers and they're pointing to each other, and those are the point-to-point microwave links. What we do is we have the ability to use the same sort of technology, but we don't have to have as many point-to-point. We do point to what we call multipoint. So it's a real network topology. It's not the peer-to-peer.
And rugged, of course, as you point out, the terrain is rugged, so the equipment has to be. But when I first read that word rugged, I thought everything was big, bulky machines, and then I suddenly realized, yes, but it's wireless at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is the lightest and easiest. Once it's installed, it's perfect.
And exactly what you say, the equipment not only is extremely rugged, but the methodology of transport, in other words, this wireless capacity that we have is extremely rugged and works through a lot of interference. Do you remember when you had your baby monitor and somebody would pick up their phone next door and you could hear them talking?
Yeah.
That's what wireless, people picture wireless as, right? Your cell phone that drops half the calls, or there's an echo. That's what people think about wireless. Well, you cannot have that when you're saving lives or you're monitoring very important equipment and these types of things. So the wireless communication aspect is extremely rugged as well. Interference mitigation, the types of things that allow that communication to happen over long, long distances, very, very far distances. We're talking of 50, 60, 100-kilometer distances between locations.
And you can communicate wirelessly over that kind of distance.
Absolutely.
And so this is obviously, these are not consumer standards, these are much higher standards.
Yes. These are, we talk about the consumer grade products, we talk about the commercial, and then we go into the industrial and the military, and those are much harsher, much more rugged, and require to have a reliability that's completely different. You need to have what they call 5 nines and 6 nines, and there's 99.9999% uptime, and communications always available. It's very important. So.
And harsher still are the public markets when they,
Absolutely.
when they don't like you, when they suddenly turn on you. And so when you stepped into Redline, let's talk about that because it's an incredible turnaround story.
Thank you.
You started that, you weren't president, you came on the board, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I was asked to join the board by one of the major shareholders who had been involved in the company for about 10 years and who saw the company's dream sort of kind of dry up and go away, and asked me to step in on the board originally just to look at, is there something in this company? What's wrong? Why haven't we turned the corner? The company had been there for around 10 years, and there was some senses sometimes and semblances of success, but never picked up. So I asked to join the board in very late 2008 to take a look at this.
Which was a bad time to begin with, when you think of it.
You know, the company had just gone public in late 2007. It went public on the TSX at around $6 and very quickly dropped to around $1 and then traded down at the 60 cents level all through 2008. When I was asked to join the board, it was trading at 40 cents, 35 cents. It went as low as 18 cents at one point or something of that nature. And so it wasn't the best time. I mean,
the sky was falling. This was Bear Stearns and everything.
Sky was falling there, but also the company had really invested in a technology which was called WiMAX, and it doesn't really matter what the technology really was, but they had chosen a technology that for whatever reason didn't materialize in the marketplace. So it was a technology bet, and the company was a technology bet. And what we did is when we came in and really looked at this thing and said, let's turn this company from a technology company into a solutions company. Let's make sure that we talk about the benefits of the customer. Let's listen to the customers. Let's see what they need. And let's build what they need. And forget if it's called LTE, or if it's called WiMAX, or if it's called Wi-Fi, if it's called Zigbee, because at the end of the day, nobody really cares about that. My mother has a cell phone. If you ask my mom, is it CDMA or TDMA or WDMA? Is it run on the HSPA network or on the GSM network or on the... She doesn't care. She shouldn't have to care.
Yeah, that's right.
She wants to pick up the phone and call her son or her daughter. More her daughter, but she wants to be able to do that. And that's why people wrap their heads too much into what the technology is as opposed to what is the solution, what's the benefit of doing this.
But WiMAX was a disappointment anyway.
WiMAX was a big disappointment for the market, and Redline was a WiMAX company until 2009. So let's go back to what you asked me. So I joined the board in late 2008, identified very, very quickly that there was a problem, that the companies just didn't work anymore. My recommendation was the easy recommendation: change management. You know, it's always easy for the board guy to come in and say, do that.
It's like the hockey team.
Exactly. Just change the manager.
Change the coach.
You know, just change the coach. And so, you know, me with my big mouth, I said, you know, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. So the chairman looks at me and goes, you're right. We should do that. Do it. So here I am. This is now in November.
Were you scared to accept a mandate like that?
In November 2009, it was not my intention to do that. It was not my intention to do that. I absolutely, surely tell you that. And I never ran a public company. I never ran a hardware company. I never ran a wireless company. I didn't know what WiMAX stood for. So was I scared? Absolutely. It's very scary when you join that. You know, I have a lot of confidence. I have a lot of courage to do something, but at the end of the day, there's always that fear down there, say, what am I getting into? So quickly I jumped into this thing. In November 2009, I took over the company and I did what we call a 45-day plan, look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, a lot of threats.
I'm sure, was it close to closing maybe?
Yeah, it was done. I mean, it was a couple $1 million in the bank. It had lost about $150 million. The stock was trading at, again, 30 cents. The public markets had lost complete interest. WiMAX is just dying out there because LTE had announced a new technology, you know, all that kind of new stuff is coming out there. The momentum internally, what was really very difficult was you're walking around with bodies, basically. The staff was so depressed walking around. They were looking like zombies and giving up. So it was a scary time. It was a scary time. So it was dead. And in December, you know, Christmas time, took over at the end of November, presented the plan to the board, which is unfortunately we had to downsize, right size, re-engineer, and make the very hard decisions. And it's Christmas time, and that's the last thing you want to do. So it's either you have to, you know, hurt some people to save most, or you might lose everybody. So we waited till January, and then we launched in January what we called Redline 2.0, and that's where we are today, basically.
As you point out correctly, the hard part is letting people go. Did you do that in a group or individually, face-to-face? How was that done?
We didn't have a lot of time. So it was a question of quickly identifying who the guys who had to be sacrificed were, and brought them in a room, brought the two groups, the guys who get to keep their jobs and the guys who lose their jobs, unfortunately. And sometimes it's really difficult to know who was the lucky one, right, when you're doing those things. And we were very kind, and we did as much as we can. It's very important always when you have to let people go is to remember these people are human beings. They have mothers and fathers and kids and wives, and the feeling that you have being terminated is always one of, fear inside, and you want to try to alleviate as much as possible, help them with transition, help them with severance and those type of things. So we did do the harsher one, bring them in a room, and it also made it a little easier because we weren't picking on any one person. We weren't saying, hey, Bob, you got to go home and everything else. So we did that, and at the same time, we went to the group that's staying and explained what we were doing and why we did it. And the building and the rebuilding and the healing had to begin then, because this is the team that we need to ensure that we're going to be successful. And that's a very, very big part of any kind of turnaround is to be able to do that. And that's when we discover the problems.
Yes, I was going to say, yeah. So actually you're smiling because it wasn't over.
I'm smiling now.
So then what?
I had hair then.
So then what happened?
This was the real beginning of the challenges, and we talk about successes, but I want to really, talk about how difficult it was to get there and overcome some of these. So the first thing we discover is, obviously, there's not a lot of cash. The market doesn't like the product. The technology is not there. We have no analysts covering our stock. All this bad. We discovered that we had some accounting irregularities in terms of the way that they accounted for revenue. And there are different rules on accounting and what you have to do and so on. And we ended up discovering that the revenues that were stated had to be restated. It didn't just have to be restated for the last quarter or 2 quarters. They had to be restated for 4 years.
Wow.
That process is a very expensive process, time-consuming process. And of course, it takes away from you trying to rebuild something because you're focused on it.
It's a killer in the media.
It's a killer in the media. It's a killer. Your competitors are talking about it. Your staff is reading this thing. And, you're questioning, you're challenging what happened. We brought in a third-party investigation to look at everything. We didn't want to do it internally. We wanted to be clean. We wanted to tell the street everything is happening. We did a press release every 2 weeks, letting everybody know what's going on, be transparent. It was very important to me. So we went through that that investigation of looking into every detail of our business. And part of that is a learning of what else, was there anything else? What was the problems? Yeah. So obviously the economy was bad, as we mentioned. WiMAX was bad. Now we have these restatements. And part of the restatements, when we said we had to restate, remember I mentioned earlier that we went public in 2007.
Yeah.
Well, we had to restate revenues of 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009. So
people who had bought the stock complained, I assume.
They complained. So the first thing that happened is we weren't able to issue our statements. So TSX froze our stock, and we had what we call a cease trade order. So basically, you're not allowed to trade any stock, derivatives, any kind of thing. No way to raise any money. The second thing that happened, of course, we got a class action lawsuit filed against the company, its past officers, its directors, everybody and their cousin for
these mistakes.
The challenges were they kept coming. We had to open a closet, and then more skeletons. You'd open another closet, and piles of bones would fall out. At one point, I thought I was in France they have the catacombs,
yeah,
and you had the bones everywhere. Well, that's what I felt like I was walking through the Valley of the Bones, And we discovered a number of other things, and one of the things that the company had done in Canada is our product, as you mentioned earlier, it's what they call dual purpose. So we sell to the military as well as to commercial industrial applications. And so whenever there's a military aspect of it, especially when there's high encryption, our product has the highest encryption in the world. When you do export, you have to have export controls and export permits, which we do, and we're fantastic. But prior to those years, the company, and prior times, was selling without export permits. So one day we discover and we find out that the Canadian government has seized all of our shipments export, and we're not allowed to export anymore. This company, 95% of our revenue comes outside of Canada.
So that's like a death order.
That's a death order. So that's a difficult thing to deal with. That wasn't the worst.
Oh, okay, please, pray tell.
It gets better. Again, remember we're talking of years where contract manufacturing, I mean, it was going downhill, and our contract manufacturer had announced that their plants were closing, so we could not build any more products. And literally, the banks were going to be taking, away the assets, and we had a bunch of what we call our components that are, raw materials that are going to be ready to be built. We needed to get them out of the warehouse prior to this closing, because how else we have no money to buy product, no money to buy components. It's the only thing we can do is convert our components into products and sell our products. So we literally sent semi-trucks down to the warehouse, literally semi-trucks, our guys in semi-trucks, to go pick them up on a Friday and hopefully get them out in time before the contract manufacturer closes. And at the same time, try to find a contract manufacturer who's going to say, hey, we want to build for you because you're such a great credit and everything else.
But somehow you got through all of that.
We got through that.
And I'm just thinking, as you described this, the few remaining customers, you had to service them.
Oh, absolutely. You have to service them. And the first thing we did is I got in a plane and I traveled in the first year. When I was there, I traveled 140 days. And I went to 51 different countries, places, cities, and states around the world. And my VP of business development did the same thing. And we got into the habit of going to visit all of our customers. It was very important to protect our customers. Our staff was very important, and our customers were very important. So it was the beginning of going to communicate to everybody. So in early 2010, gone to see all our customers, continue servicing them, figure out a way to be able to service them, build a different infrastructure internally. We had a department called the Customer Advocacy prior to us getting there. They called it the CA department. But the way it was run, it was a really customer apathy, right? It was like, those customers, man, I wish they could do it themselves, like they would get mad. And so we changed that. And the guy who runs our customer service group is a phenomenal young man who completely transformed, the customer support into something where we're second to none. Today we have a 100% CSI index from our customers. Really, really enjoy our customers. So visiting our customers, traveling all over the world, supporting them, very big part of our business.
But I imagine if you come into a place that's, fairly well organized, like the military in a given country, they read the papers and they say, come here, explain this, explain this. You must have had a lot of explaining to do. There must have been a moment of...
If they didn't read the papers, our competitors made sure that they got the articles. They would fax them the articles.
using your phone book.
They'd look up the phone numbers and send it. But absolutely, it was a very difficult. 2010 was a very intensely difficult time because you're trying to build an organization, build a company, build value, managing through restatements, through a class action lawsuit, through cease trade order, trying to find a new contract manufacturer, throwing away WiMAX and building our core technology, coming up with new verticals, new markets, going away from the telecom service provider, the Rogers of the world, the AT&Ts of the world, the Verizons of the world, because those customers weren't buying product anymore. And this company was only selling to them. So we came up with new technology.
Energy, the military.
Yeah, exactly. All these new markets.
And when did you see the top of the hill? When did you finally get the sense, okay, I am turning this around and it will not fail?
I'd say in mid-2011. Mid-2011, the effort and the vision and the courage and the conviction really started paying off. In 2010, we did about $1 million of revenue in the vertical you mentioned, the energy vertical. And in 2011, we'd done $9 million. And so you started to see the penetration. So some of the customers you mentioned, whether it's Shell or whether it's Occidental Petroleum or Marathon, these large corporations started using our technology. We started winning, and you started to sense that the tide was reversed. And you stopped having, the problems, and you could start reversing and starting to grow. And we really started seeing the growth in 2012 very successfully.
Must be a great feeling.
It's a great feeling. It's a great feeling. The stock's back to $6. Our customers are second to none in the world. If you talk to our staff, they walk around with, just a spark in their face and, just a lift. They feel good about themselves. We've had a tremendous amount of articles written about Redline and success, and our customers have been unbelievable at supporting us that way. And it's a great feeling. When you have such fear and it's difficult to get there, when you feel that you're finally there. And every day is still a challenge in everything we do. It sounds like it's easy, but there's a lot of scary days. You're by yourself and you're fighting, you're fighting the battle by yourself all the time. It gets difficult, right?
But Eric, Melka, I'm sure people out there are saying it's a great feeling and he deserves it. And so enjoy it, and long life to you and to Redline.
Thank you very much.
Eric Melka was our guest this week on Entrepreneurs, the Lingbari series of the World Show. I'm Bob Scully. Have a great week. Thanks.